More than 500,000 people voted in New Hampshire Tuesday in the first primary of the 2016 U.S. presidential election. New York billionaire Donald Trump and Vermont U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders celebrated resounding victories as political outsiders. We begin our coverage with CCTV Sean Caleb's in Manchester, New Hampshire. And Sean, let's begin with Donald Trump. The billionaire businessman swept the New Hampshire primary, beating his nearest rival by what, nearly 20 points. Does this win legitimize his candidacy from a television celebrity to a real contender now?
Yeah, it's really been something to watch this unfold. I think if the other candidates are not taking him seriously, if he is not viewed as a legitimate candidate across the United States right now, then people are making a huge mistake. He is somebody who has tapped into the frustration, the anger that the American voters feel right now for the way Washington works. It's dysfunction. The establishment. Exit polling last night showed that nearly 5 out of 10 people who were questioned on the GOP side, the Republican side, said that they feel betrayed by their party. So Trump is the candidate who was offering them something else. He has tremendous name recognition, first as the brash billionaire, and secondly as the reality TV star. And where he failed in Iowa to have a good ground operation and get his supporters out to the polls, it is one thing he succeeded on greatly here last night, lapping the field, if you will. All the other candidates reduced to also-ran status. And what's going to be important for them moving forward, because Trump has been a thorn in the side of the Republican establishment, is trying to winnow the field more and get one established candidate, if you will, whether it's Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, John Kasich, the governor from the state of Ohio. They need to get one candidate and throw all their weight behind that if they're going to have some kind of chance of stopping this juggernaut, because make no mistake about it, the one Republican who left this state onto South Carolina for the next big showdown with momentum was Donald Trump. Anand?
Sean, now in those exit polls, among voters who cared most about honesty and trustworthiness, 91% chose Bernie Sanders over former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. In fact, she lost in every key demographic. So how much of a boost was New Hampshire for the Sanders campaign, and what's the takeaway for Clinton?
It is difficult right now to gauge just how much this means to Bernie Sanders. It was tremendous. You heard him last night talking about a huge win. The Clinton camp, if you will, daughter Chelsea, husband Bill, former president, they spent a great deal of time here, even targeting New Hampshire as early as August. They needed to win New Hampshire to legitimize their claim. Think about it. In 2008, the Democratic Party was ready to anoint Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee. You saw what happened. An unknown senator out of the state of Illinois, Barack Obama, came along and not only defeated her, went on to be a two-term president. This was supposed to be her year. It is not shaping up that way. Again, voters are looking for someone outside the establishment. Never mind the fact that Bernie Sanders is a 74-year-old U.S. senator. He is perceived as the outsider. Why? Hillary Clinton has spent a quarter of a century on the international political spotlight here from the United States as a former First Lady, a powerful senator after 9/11, and most recently U.S. Secretary of State. I think that the Clinton camp is amazed that they lost one demographic, and that being women voters, young women voters. That was certainly a huge setback. We saw just the other night former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright trying to drum up support for Clinton, come out and say any woman who does not vote for Clinton, there's a special place in hell. Well, that backfired in a huge way. She's tried to distance herself from that statement, but now the best that Clinton can do is just move on after taking a severe drubbing here, going down, trying to get more money for her campaign and try to take on Sanders. Where Sanders is really picking up steam, all of his donors have been small donors. He has not tapped in to the PAC money, the Political Action Committee money. Sanders' average donation is about $27. So he can go back and back to his donors, and they can give 10, 15, 20. So he is going to be able to restock his war chest, where Clinton has reached out for huge amounts of money. It is going to be difficult for her to get that money. So we are in for a huge race. It's, I think, one that everybody expects to be extremely close as we go to South Carolina, Nevada, and then the all-important Super Tuesday, when 11 states, voters from 11 U.S. states, go to the polls. That is going to have a huge say in who gets the nomination and who becomes the next president of the United States. On him.
Okay, Sean, thanks a lot. That's CCTV Sean Caleb's reporting from New Hampshire. Well, joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Julianne Malveaux. She's an economist and the former president of Bennett College. From Copenhagen, we're joined by Edward Ashby. He's an associate professor in the Department of Business and Politics at Copenhagen Business School. Also with us in Washington, D.C. is John Hart. He's the editor-in-chief of Opportunity Lives, a news website dedicated to conservative solutions. And with us from New York is Sean McElwee. He's a writer and research associate with Demos Action, a public policy organization. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Julianne, this time the primaries went according to the polls. Resounding victories, as we just heard, for Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. It's also shaken up the race. We're hearing that at least two candidates may drop out of the Republican race. What did you make of it?
Well, on the Democratic side, of course, Vermont is a contiguous state. That's not an excuse for Bernie doing so well, but that's one of the things that we can say. But secondly, clearly there's a momentum. And the way that things had happened in Iowa, that razor-thin victory of Hillary's was really a tie. Let's just call it a tie. When you win something by 0.4 tenths of percent, we don't want to even count that. So he's got momentum. And he's really raising questions that I think that the Hillary camp had been very complacent about. Talking about the trickle down, talking about Wall Street. He has stirred up a generation. Young people are coming out of college with enormous debt, unable to enter the mortgage market, looking at a job market while you keep saying the unemployment rate is going down, down, down. They're not feeling it. And so you're seeing young people, and then you do not get to guilt young women. You don't get to tell them there's a place in hell for you. Now, in fairness, and your reporter is a little bit wrong, Madeleine Albright has been known for that comment forever. So she's not saying you're going to hell if you don't vote for Hillary. But you cannot guilt young women who are very independent. Nearly half of young people, under 35, they don't party affiliate. And so I'm not surprised by the Democratic results. But when we go from these all-white states, or mostly white states, to Nevada, to South Carolina, to Super Tuesday, we're going to see some other things. On the flip side, I find the Republican Party, I don't mean to be, forgive me, Republicans, if I'm being a little, it's like being at the sideshow. But, and we knew that Trump was going to win. What I had expected to see was somebody come out of the clump. And really, Kasich put a lot of time and money there, but nobody else has. It's interesting that Christie is probably going to have to leave. I'm not disappointed nor surprised that Carly Fiorina, who I thought did well in representing herself, but not well in organizing a ground game, or Ben Carson, who has just totally fallen, they're gone.
What about Jeb Bush?
Jeb Bush did better in New Hampshire than he's done anywhere else, but, what's next? He spent what? How many tens of thousands of dollars per vote to get in there? And I disagree with Donald Trump about almost everything, but you don't bring your mama outside to stump votes for you. I just think that was a little bit less than. He held up well.
Right.
He definitely held up well, and the governors are still stuck in the middle with each other. But all it says to us, Anand, is that we have a couple of months of entertainment.
Right. John, entertainment, or call it what you will, as Sean Caleb's, our reporter, told us, voters appear to be looking for non-establishment figures. And if we look at the two winners on Tuesday night, does that tell us that voters in the United States have had enough of business-as-usual politics? They want change, radical change now.
No, I do, and I think it's not just entertainment. I think it highlights the fact that we have a great political system. We talk a lot about what's wrong with our country, but the fact that you could have two outsider candidates, Donald Trump, who is opposed by the Republican establishment, Bernie Sanders, who arguably is outside the mainstream of Democrats, they both won last night. What that shows is that the new elites in American society are the individuals. And this is a global phenomenon. This is an American Spring, if you will, where you have individuals empowered with technology are leveling the playing field with institutions in ways we haven't seen before. And this is a trend that's been happening for a number of years. This is not something that just started.
Are we giving too much credit to, in New Hampshire, it's 24 delegates. And so are we spending, at least on the D side, so are we spending too much time looking at such a small number of delegates without looking at the diversity in our nation that neither party has really recognized?
No, but I think this is a national trend. So you've seen in the Arab Spring, you have the American Spring, if you will. The UK, you had Jeremy Corbyn. So what I see on the Democratic side is a Democratic socialist who represents where the Democratic Party has been for a number of years,
Right.
which is a much more overt public embrace of socialism. So I completely disagree with Bernie Sanders. I think his ideas have been tried and failed, which was called the 20th century. We had a lot of socialist experiments.
Okay, we'll get to that.
But I don't like Trump either. I'm not a Trumper.
But it's to your interest to argue that. It's to your interest as a conservative to argue that.
I want to get to our other guests. Sean, John made an interesting point here, saying that, look, we have modern technology now, social media, which is leveling the playing field as far as politics is concerned. But at the end of the day, these elections, are they all about money?
I don't think money decides who ends up winning elections, but money definitely decides who sits at the table afterwards. So far in the 2016 election, you've had 100 donors who have given more money, $192 million, than 2 million small donors. So the question is, when these people get elected into office, who are they going to be listening to and who's going to have a seat at the table? Well, there's actually a recent study by Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page, and what they did was they looked over 30 years and they examined public policy opinions and public policy changes. And what they found is that when you actually examine whose voice ends up influencing policymakers, it's not the middle class, it's really about elites. And so I would argue that although we've seen in New Hampshire, 2 outsider candidates win, the question is, when are we actually going to see policy that is in line with the preferences of the middle class and the working class? And we haven't seen that yet.
Edward, I know it's very early days, but how is this election being viewed, or the campaign right now being viewed in Europe, especially the 2 top candidates that we've been looking at, in their respective parties?
Well, if we leave aside the chattering classes who follow the details of everything that happens in their particular state primary, yes, I mean, as you say, it's Clinton and Trump who get the attention, and in particular, of course, Donald Trump. I think from a European perspective, the idea that somebody can come in from the outside, somebody who hasn't got a track record in politics, and then stand as a presidential candidate, because we don't have primaries, because we don't have caucuses, this appears something very, very strange indeed. Now, European parties are changing. We're beginning to catch up with the American system, but we're a long way from having caught up.
Jan, why do you think Hillary Clinton, at one time she was regarded as the inevitable Democrat candidate. She was going to be right up there. People were talking of her walking into the White House, etc. But why is she having such trouble with voters right now? She's even having trouble, as we know, with young women voters.
Well, there are 3 things going on. One, Hillary has been around forever. Thus and therefore, as wonderful as she is, and I do think she's wonderful, I think she's made a lot of a history for women. There's also a history of chicanery. There's Benghazi, there are the emails, and there are all these things that are there, they're under the surface. So how do you get a 91% of the people saying you're untrustworthy, despite everything you've done? I wouldn't call her untrustworthy, but I have friends who would disagree with me on that. So number one, she's been around so long that she's got a record that a lot of other folks don't have. Number two, because she was the presumptive, she basically snuffed out any notion of any competition. Bernie Sanders, remember, just came up. He hadn't been saying for the past 3 years he was running for president. It just sort of was a pop-up. Martin O'Malley, had been around for a little while, but who else? I mean, many of us wish that Joe Biden had been in just so there was some traction. And so you cannot have a coronation. You do not get crowned president of the United States. And I think for so many people who have been so supportive of Hillary for so long, that was the thinking. And so many people are turned off by that. I mean, if you think back a year ago, Anand, what was it? It was going to be the basically the dynastic smackdown between the Clintons and the Bushes, and it turned out not to be that way at all. And I think the third thing in terms of women is that there is a big generational conversation that we haven't had with young people who operate and communicate very differently than my generation, the baby boom generation, does. You and I could be sitting at a party together. We'd be texting each other instead of having this conversation.
Right.
That's how they do it when you're under 30. The relationships are not the same kinds of relationships. And nobody believes that anybody is owed anything. Just because you're a woman does not mean you're owed the vote. As much as I enjoy and appreciate Hillary Clinton, and I wrote a piece last week called, Head Hillary, Heart Bernie, I would also say that every time she says, I'm a woman, I just want to sort of shake her and say, okay, give me yet again an opportunity to see the obvious. No one is calling you a guy. And, you know, young women are very turned off by that.
Right.
They're independent. They want to be acknowledged for their views.
John, if we look at the Republican side, Donald Trump, I mean, he was seen for a long time as a lightweight, political lightweight, bit of a buffoon, very abrasive, loudmouth, etc.
Right.
Does this now change that?
Well, I think what it does is it establishes Trump as a front runner, but not a standard bearer. And there's a big difference between the two. A front runner is someone who's leading a very crowded field full of very capable, credible candidates. So Trump's strength derives from a large field of people who are getting a significant number of the vote. So to be a standard bearer is to be getting 40%, 45% of the vote. My belief is Trump has hit a ceiling of around 35%, which is what he got in New Hampshire, because he's not really a conservative. He didn't marinate in conservative ideas like Ronald Reagan did for years. So Trump has like Sanders, has come out of nowhere. But the difference between Trump and Sanders is Sanders had a track record of advocating policies that were democratic socialism for years, whereas Trump has no political background. So he's a blank slate. So he's an unknown quantity, so a lot of Republicans don't trust Donald Trump.
Isn't that what voters are saying right now? We don't care if this guy did not match.
Exactly. That's the question, is how many of those people are there who are going to vote? That is the critical question. So in Iowa, I thought that Trump would lose, and I was correct, but I thought Trump would also have a lower result than he did in New Hampshire, because when voters test his ideas and they realize he's not conservative, they reject him. So I was right in Iowa, but wrong in New Hampshire. So the question is, well, what's going to happen going forward? And has he hit that ceiling of 35%? And if he doesn't get beyond that, it's going to be very hard for him to consolidate his support within the Republican Party.
What happens if those other people come together? What happens if you have all these folks who have 11, 12% come together? They topple Trump.
They would.
You know,
exactly.
Well, once they go away,
Right.
then the other person
And that may
standing
happen
gets
eventually.
those votes.
I think that's the most likely scenario.
Okay, Edward, I'm coming to you in a moment. Sean, you know, this is a very early stage of the election, of course, but it's very important because we hear lots of talk about momentum, lots of talk about raising money, etc. Why is it so important for the candidates that they do well in this early stage as far as money is concerned and as they go through the states for the rest of the primaries?
Well, it's certainly important to have sort of the backing of the establishment, but I think it's important to note with both Bernie and Trump, what you've seen is voters sort of rejecting the establishment because their lived experiences have not been good. You know, wages have been stalled for a very long time. Elites on both sides of the aisle have pushed for free trade policies and deregulatory policies that a lot of voters blame for their current economic plight. And at the same time, these same elites, again, bipartisan, have been pushing for a very muscular engagement overseas. And for a lot of Americans, what they see is them taking that money that could be spent at home and shipping it off overseas. In the end, regardless of who wins, what we have seen is a real rebellion against establishment politics. And I think that the establishment should take some time and think about how to actually respond to the concerns of working class and middle class Americans.
Edward, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say that at this point, I think a lot of it's going to come down to what happens between Cruz and Trump. I mean, they're both competing for the outsider anti-establishment vote. And clearly, they've got different bases of support. Now, Trump is vulnerable to all those accusations that he's not really a conservative. But on the other hand, Cruz's basis of support is also fairly narrow. We're talking largely evangelicals and to some extent the limited government crowd. So a lot is just going to hang on what happens in that particular race. And at this stage of the game, my money, based on New Hampshire anyway, is on Trump, simply because he's demonstrated an ability to win across quite a number of demographics.